The C-130 touched down at Forward Operating Base Atlas just after midnight, its engine screaming against the Syrian darkness as it rolled to a stop on the battle-scarred runway. Sand swirled in violent spirals around the aircraft, illuminated by harsh floodlights that turned the whole scene into something from another world. Colonel Marcus Reeves stood at the edge of the tarmac, arms crossed, watching the rear cargo door lower with hydraulic precision. He'd been commanding aviation operations at Atlas for 11 months. He'd seen pilots come and go. The good ones, the average ones, the ones who came home in body bags. But he'd never seen anything quite like what walked off that plane. Captain Maya Torres descended the ramp with a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She was smaller than he'd expected, 5'6", maybe 5'7". Dark hair pulled back tight. Hispanic features set in an expression that gave absolutely nothing away. She wore her flight suit like it was a second skin, patches faded from years of use, and she moved with the quiet economy of someone who'd long ago stopped trying to impress anyone. Reeves had read her file 3 times. He still didn't believe half of it. She stopped in front of him and offered a crisp salute. Captain Torres reporting as ordered, sir. Reeves returned the salute, studying her face. 32 years old. Eyes that looked older, much older. The kind of eyes that had seen things most pilots only heard about in whispered legends. At ease, Captain. Welcome to the edge of nowhere. He gestured toward the cluster of buildings that passed for base operations. Walk with me. They fell into step together, boots crunching on gravel that had been imported from somewhere else, because even the rocks in this part of Syria wanted to kill you. Your transfer came through fast, Reeves said, keeping his tone conversational. Someone at CENTCOM really wanted you here. So I'm told, sir. Any idea why they pulled you from Oceania? Torres kept her eyes forward. My order said to report. They didn't say why. Reeves nodded slowly. She wasn't going to make this easy. He hadn't expected her to. We got a situation developing, something that requires specific capabilities. I'm a pilot, Colonel. I fly what I'm told to fly, where I'm told to fly it. Is that right? Reeves stopped walking. They were between buildings now, out of earshot from the maintenance crews, working through the night. Because your record suggests you fly wherever the hell you want, whenever the hell you want. For the first time, something flickered in Torres's expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. Just an acknowledgement that he'd done his homework. That was a long time ago, sir. 5 years isn't that long. Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you know why I requested you specifically for this assignment, Captain? Torres met his gaze without flinching. No, sir. Because in 41 minutes over the Zagros Mountains, you did something that shouldn't have been possible. You engaged 3 enemy fighters, neutralized a mobile SAM battery, provided close air support for a downed aircrew, and flew back to the carrier with your aircraft held together by willpower and duct tape. He paused, all while operating completely alone after your wingman went down in the first 30 seconds of the engagement. Torres said nothing. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 4 pilots came home that night because of you. Reeves continued. 4 families got to see their sons and daughters again. And according to every tactical analysis I've read, none of them should have survived. Still nothing from Torres. Just that 1,000-yard stare fixed somewhere past his shoulder. What I need to know, Captain, is whether you can do it again. Torres's voice came out flat, completely devoid of emotion. 2 pilots died that night, sir. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell and Lieutenant James Vance. I don't count wins. I count the ones I couldn't save. If that opening hooked you, stay with me. This story only gets heavier from here. Subscribe now for more war stories like this and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where Maya Torres became a legend and why some legends would rather stay buried. Reeves absorbed that for a long moment. The wind had picked up, carrying fine particulate sand that stung exposed skin. Somewhere in the distance, an engine test echoed across the base. Fair enough, he finally said, but I'm going to need to know your call sign. For the roster, Torres's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Something that suggested this question had been asked before, and the answer had always carried weight. Phantom 7, she said quietly. Colonel Reeves went completely still. He stared at her for 3 full seconds, and in those seconds, Maya Torres watched something change behind his eyes. recognition, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. Say again? Phantom 7, sir. That's my call sign. Reeves took half a step back, without seeming to realize he'd done it. His hand came up to rub the bridge of his nose, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of casual authority. Jesus Christ. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. You're the pilot, the one from 21. There were a lot of pilots in 2021, sir. Not like you. Reeves shook his head slowly. I was attached to the Eisenhower Battle Group when your debrief came through classified channels. Every squadron commander in the fleet read that report. Most of them didn't believe it. They thought someone had exaggerated the numbers, padded the AR to justify the losses. He paused. But the satellite footage didn't lie. And neither did the 4 pilots who came home when they should have died. Torres shifted her weight slightly. Is there a point to this conversation, Colonel? The point, Captain, is that I asked for the best pilot available for an impossible mission. And CENTCOM sent me a ghost story. Reeves turned and started walking again, faster this time. Come on. There's a briefing in 45 minutes that you need to attend. What kind of briefing? Reeves didn't look back. The kind where I tell you that 8 Marines are trapped 70 miles inside enemy territory, surrounded by enough integrated air defense to knock down half the Air Force, and someone needs to go get them out. Torres' stride faltered for just a fraction of a second. Then she caught up, matching his pace stride for stride. Why Marines? This is a Navy operation? Because the Army task force that was supposed to extract them got ambushed 6 hours ago. 17 Kia. The convoy never even made it past the phase line. Reeves pushed through the door of the operations building, fluorescent lights replacing the darkness. And because every conventional option has been explored and rejected, what's left is unconventional. Unconventional how? Reeves stopped at the entrance to the briefing room, his hand on the door handle. Through the small window, Torres could see a room full of officers and senior NCOs gathered around a central display table. Maps covered every wall. The tension was visible even from out here. The kind of unconventional that requires a pilot who's already survived the unsurvivable. Reeves met her eyes one last time. The kind that requires someone who doesn't know how to quit, even when quitting is the only rational choice. He pushed open the door. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the assembled room, meet Phantom 7. The silence that followed was absolute. 23 people turned to look at Maya Torres as she walked into the room, and she could feel the weight of their stares like physical pressure. Some of them knew the name. She could tell by the way their expressions shifted from curiosity to something approaching reverence. Others didn't know, but they could read the reactions of those who did. A master gunnery sergeant near the back muttered something under his breath. It sounded like a prayer. Torres ignored all of it. She'd spent 5 years ignoring the stares, the whispers, the mythology that had grown up around a mission she replayed in her nightmares every single night. What mattered wasn't the legend. What mattered was the 8 names on the tactical display in front of her. 8 Marines. 8 families waiting for word. 8 souls who might not see tomorrow unless someone did something impossible. Torres found an empty seat near the front and sat down. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Colonel Reeves moved ahead of the table and picked up a laser pointer. All right, let's start from the beginning. 62 hours ago, a Marine Force recon team was inserted via rotary wing into this area. The red circled a mountainous region on the map. Their mission was to establish surveillance on a suspected weapons transfer point, HVD movement, standard reconnaissance. Torres studied the terrain. Rough country, limited extraction routes, lots of places for bad things to hide. What happened? Reeves's jaw tightened. What happened, Captain, is that someone sold them out. The team was compromised before they even reached their observation point. They've been fighting for their lives ever since. A Marine major near the display table spoke up. His name tape read Castellano, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. 8 men. Sergeant First Class Derek Mitchell commanding. They've been holding a defensive position in a bombed-out factory complex for the past 19 hours. Ammunition is critical. 3 wounded. No medevac possible. Torres felt something cold settle in her chest. Mitchell? Major Castellano looked at her. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, 26 years old. His sister was a Navy pilot, died in a training accident a few years back. He requested Force Recon specifically to honor her memory. The cold sensation intensified. Torres kept her expression neutral. But inside, something was breaking open that she'd spent 5 years trying to seal shut. Sarah Mitchell, the wingman she'd lost over the Zagros Mountains. The voice that had gone silent mid-sentence when the SAM caught her aircraft and turned it into a fireball. Derek Mitchell was Sarah's brother, and now he was trapped behind enemy lines, waiting for someone to save him the way Torres hadn't been able to save his sister. "Continue," Torres said, her voice perfectly steady. Reeves exchanged a glance with Castellano, clearly noting her reaction, but choosing not to comment on it. The problem is the threat environment. This isn't some isolated pocket of resistance. The enemy has established a fully integrated air defense network throughout the region. Multiple S-400 batteries, Panzer short-range systems for gap coverage, and at least 2 squadrons of MiG-29s operating from a forward airfield 40 miles northwest of the target area. He clicked to a new slide. A satellite image appeared, overlaid with colored circles representing missile engagement zones. "This is what we're dealing with." The room went quiet. The image showed layer upon layer of overlapping threat rings, each one representing a system that could knock an aircraft out of the sky with ruthless efficiency. The factory complex where Marines were holding out sat almost exactly in the center of the most heavily defended corridor. "Sweet Jesus," someone whispered. Torres leaned forward, studying the display with clinical intensity. "What's the radar coverage gap to the south?" Reeves highlighted an area. "Minimal, maybe 23 minutes during a scheduled maintenance window, but that's theoretical. We can't confirm it will actually happen. And the terrain? Valley approaches exist, but they require sustained flight at 100 feet AGL to stay below radar horizon. At combat speeds, you're looking at a margin of error measured in inches." Torres nodded slowly, her mind already running calculations. 100 feet at 600 knots. Terrain masking against SAM acquisition. Timing windows measured in seconds. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of mission she'd been built for. What assets are available for the strike package? Reeves hesitated. "That's the problem, Captain. There's no strike package. Every available aircraft in theater is currently committed to defensive operations following the ambush on the extraction convoy. The enemy launched a coordinated offensive specifically designed to draw our assets away from this sector. They knew we'd respond. They planned for it." Torres absorbed that information without visible reaction. "So what do you have?" 2F divided by -18S. You and 1 wingman. That's it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Torres looked around the room, reading the faces of the officers and NCOs who'd spent the last day trying to find another way. They'd exhausted every option, run every simulation, explored every alternative, and they'd come up empty. "Who's my wingman?" A young lieutenant stood up from the back of the room. Early 20s, lean and eager, with the kind of barely contained energy that marked him as freshly qualified. His name tape read Patterson. "Lieutenant Jake Patterson, ma'am. VFA 83. I got 400 hours in the Super Hornet." Torres looked at him for a long moment. 400 hours. She remembered 400 hours. She remembered being that young, that confident, that utterly certain that skill and training would be enough. "Have you ever been shot at, Lieutenant?" Patterson's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "No, ma'am. This will be my first combat engagement." "Have you ever had to fly through a SAM envelope at 100 feet while your aircraft was on fire?" "No, ma'am." "Have you ever watched a wingman die and kept flying anyway because the mission wasn't complete?" Patterson's face went pale. "No, ma'am." Torres turned back to Colonel Reeves. "Find me someone else." "There is no one else." Reeves spread his hands. "Lieutenant Patterson is the only pilot available who's qualified on the Super Hornet. Everyone else is either airborne, wounded, or dead." Torres closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked at Patterson again, really looked, searching for something in his expression that would tell her whether he'd break when the pressure came. What she saw was fear. But underneath the fear was something else. Determination. Maybe even courage. "You understand what we're flying into?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I studied the threat environment. I know the odds. The odds say we don't come back. Patterson swallowed hard, but his voice stayed steady. 8 Marines are counting on us, ma'am. I'd rather die trying to save them than live knowing I didn't try. Something shifted in Torres's expression. Not quite approval, but something close to it. Then study the terrain maps. Memorize every valley, every ridge, every piece of ground cover between here and that factory. Because when we cross the phase line, there won't be time to think, only to react. Patterson nodded sharply. Yes, ma'am. Torres turned back to the tactical display, and for the next hour, she tore the mission plan apart and rebuilt it from scratch. She questioned every assumption, challenged every timing calculation, demanded data on enemy radar patterns, patrol schedules, and ammunition loads. The officers in the room watched her work, and slowly, their skepticism transformed into something else. They were watching a master at work, someone who understood the art of the impossible because she'd done it before. By the time she finished, the mission plan looked nothing like what they'd originally proposed. It was faster, more aggressive, and infinitely more dangerous. This is insane, Major Castellano said quietly. Yes, Torres agreed, but it's the only way those Marines come home. She looked around the room one final time, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Wheels up in 4 hours. Any questions? There were no questions. The briefing room emptied slowly, officers filing out to make their own preparations. Torres remained behind, studying the map with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. She traced a route with her finger, memorizing every contour, every potential threat, every place where things could go wrong. You knew her. Torres didn't turn around. She'd heard Colonel Reeves approach, recognized his footsteps. I don't know what you mean, sir. Sarah Mitchell, the pilot you lost 5 years ago. Derek Mitchell's sister. Reeves moved to stand beside her. You knew her. Torres was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She was my wingman. We went through flight school together. She was better than me, faster, sharper, more natural talent than anyone I'd ever seen. Torres's hand curled into a fist at her side. She should have been the one to survive that day. Not me, but you're the one who lived. Yes. Torres finally looked at him, and I've spent every day since then trying to figure out why. Reeves studied her face. Have you found an answer? No, but I made a promise. Torres's eyes went back to the map, to the small icon representing the factory complex where 8 Marines waited for rescue. I went to Sarah's funeral. Her parents were there. Her brother. They asked me what happened, and I told them everything, every detail, every moment. And when I was done, her mother looked at me and asked me one question. What question? She asked me if Sarah's death meant something, if it mattered. Torres's voice cracked slightly, just for a moment, before hardening again. I told her yes. I told her that Sarah died protecting her country, protecting her squadron, protecting the mission. And then I promised her that I would spend the rest of my life making sure that was true, that every mission I flew, every risk I took, every time I put my life on the line, it would be in honor of Sarah's sacrifice. Reeves was quiet for a long time. The hum of electronics filled the silence. And her brother? He was 19 years old. He shook my hand and told me he was going to enlist. Said he wanted to serve the way his sister served. Torres's jaw tightened. I tried to talk him out of it. Told him the military would chew him up and spit him out. Told him his parents had already lost one child to this war. But he enlisted anyway. He enlisted the next day. Force Recon. The hardest pipeline in the Marine Corps. Torres turned away from the map. And now he's trapped behind enemy lines, waiting for someone to save him. And that someone is you. Torres nodded slowly. It has to be me. Because if I fail, if I can't bring him home, then Sarah's death really was meaningless. Everything I've done for the past 5 years was meaningless. She walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. For hours, Colonel. Make sure that aircraft is ready. Torres didn't wait for a response. She walked out into the Syrian night, the wind carrying sand that stung her face and reminded her that she was still alive, still breathing, still carrying the weight of every pilot she'd ever lost. The maintenance hangar was 100 yards to the east, lit up like a small city. Through the open doors, she could see her aircraft being prepped for combat. Ordnance crews loaded missiles onto the hard points. Technicians ran final diagnostics. Fuel trucks pumped thousands of pounds of JP, 5 into the waiting tanks. The F divided by a -18E Super Hornet was a beautiful machine. Twin engines, 50,000 pounds of thrust, advanced radar, precision weapons. In the right hands, it was capable of things that defy convention. And Maya Torres had very good hands. She found Lieutenant Patterson standing near the nose of his own aircraft, staring up at it with an expression that mixed awe with terror. "Second thoughts?" she asked. Patterson jumped slightly, not having heard her approach. "No, ma'am. Just thinking about what's coming." Torres moved to stand beside him, looking up at the same aircraft. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about my parents. My kid sister. Whether I'll ever see them again." Patterson's voice was steady, but she could hear the strain underneath. "I'm thinking about the 8 Marines who need us, and whether I'm good enough to help save them." "You're not." Patterson turned to look at her, hurt visible in his expression. "You're not good enough," Torres repeated. "Not yet. Combat flying is different from training. The G-forces are harder because you're pulling them while missiles are trying to kill you. The decisions are faster because hesitation means death. And the consequences are real in a way that no simulation can ever prepare you for." "Then why are you bringing me?" Torres looked at him directly. "Because you don't need to be good enough. You need to be brave enough. Brave enough to follow orders. Brave enough to stay in formation. Brave enough to keep flying when your body is screaming at you to run." She paused. "Skill I can teach you. Courage has to come from inside." Patterson absorbed that for a moment. "Is that what got you through the Zagros Mountains?" "Courage." "No." Torres's voice was quiet. "What got me through was guilt. The guilt of watching my wingman die and knowing I couldn't save her. The guilt of surviving when I should have been the one in that fireball." She turned away from the aircraft. "Guilt will push you further than courage ever will, Lieutenant. It's a terrible fuel, but it burns longer than anything else." "That sounds lonely." Torres almost smiled. "Almost. Get some sleep, Patterson. I need you sharp in 3 hours." She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the darkness between buildings. Patterson watched her go, and for the first time, he began to understand what it meant to fly with a legend. Legends weren't born from triumph. They were forged in tragedy. 3 hours later, the pre-dawn sky was beginning to lighten on the eastern horizon when Torres climbed into her cockpit. The aircraft was loaded for war. 4 a.m., 1 20D missiles for air-to-air combat, 2 AGM, 88 HARM missiles for suppression of enemy air defenses, 2 GBU, 12 laser-guided bombs for close air support, and the M61 Vulcan cannon with 500 rounds of 20mm ammunition for when everything else failed. She went through her pre-flight checks with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done them 10,000 times. Instruments green, weapons armed, communications online. The familiar smell of jet fuel and military-grade electronics filled her nostrils, and for a moment, the world felt right. This was where she belonged, in a cockpit, ready to fight. Phantom 7, this is Tower. You are clear for departure, runway 27. Torres keyed her radio. Tower, Phantom 7, copy. Rolling. The engine spooled up to full military power, and the Super Hornet began to move. Behind her, Patterson's aircraft followed, his call sign Raven 2 appearing on her tactical display as they taxied toward the runway. The sun was a thin red line on the horizon when Torres released the brakes and pushed the throttles forward. The aircraft leaped down the runway, acceleration pressing her into the ejection seat with familiar force. At 150 knots, she pulled back on the stick, and the Super Hornet climbed into the Syrian dawn. Raven 2 joined up on her wing 30 seconds later, sliding into formation with textbook precision. Patterson might be new, but his basic flying skills were solid. Torres hoped that would be enough. Raven 2, Phantom 7. Communications check. Phantom 7, Raven 2. Read you 5 by 5. Good. We're going to hit the first waypoint in 12 minutes. Once we cross the phase line, we're in hostile airspace. Everything after that happens fast. Torres, check her fuel state. Stay on my wing. Don't break formation unless I tell you to. And if I tell you to run, you run. No questions. No hesitation. Copy. Copy, Phantom 7. Stay on wing. Follow orders. Run if ordered. Good. Torres looked out at the spreading dawn, the desert below turning from black to orange to gold. Let's go get those Marines. The two aircraft descended toward the deck, their radar warning receivers already beginning to chirp as distant search radars painted them with invisible beams of energy. They weren't in the threat envelope yet, but they were approaching it. 15 minutes to the phase line. Torres used the time to review the mission profile one last time. The plan was simple in concept, but brutally complex in execution. They would penetrate enemy airspace using a series of valleys and wadis, flying at 100 feet above ground level to stay below the radar horizon. The S-400s could engage what they couldn't see. The problem was the Panzer systems, mobile short-range air defense units that could pop up anywhere. And the MiGs. The MiGs were always a problem. If everything went perfectly, they would reach the factory complex in 41 minutes. They would suppress enemy forces with precision strikes. They would provide close air support while Marines broke out a defensive position and reached the extraction point. And then they would fight their way back out to the same gauntlet they'd just survived. Nothing was going to go perfectly. Torres knew that with absolute certainty. Missions like this never went according to plan. The enemy had a vote. Murphy's Law had a vote. And somewhere in the chaos of combat, something would go wrong that no amount of planning could predict. Her job was to adapt, to overcome, to find a way through when there was no way through. It was what she'd always done. It was the only thing she knew how to do. Phase line in 5 minutes, she announced. Weapons hot. Terrain masking begins at waypoint Alpha. Patterson's voice came back tense but controlled. Copy, Phantom 7. Weapons hot. The valley approach materialized ahead of them, a serpentine gash in the desert floor that would provide cover from the searching eyes of the S-400s. Torres descended toward it, her altitude dropping from 2,000 feet to 500, then 300, then 150. At 100 feet, the ground became a blur. Rocks and scrub vegetation streaked past below at over 600 miles per hour. The slightest miscalculation, the smallest lapse in concentration, would turn both aircraft into craters in the sand. Torres felt her body settle into combat mode. Her breathing slowed. Her vision sharpened. The world narrowed down to the instruments in front of her, the terrain below her, and the mission ahead. Crossing phase line now. They were in hostile airspace. The first 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Torres wove through the valley system, following a route she'd memorized during the briefing. Her radar warning receiver flickered occasionally as distant systems tried to acquire them, but the terrain masking held. They were ghosts, invisible to the watching eyes above. Then everything went wrong. Raven 2 SA-15 missile launch. Break right. Torres's warning came a fraction of a second before her own. Receiver screamed its alert. A Panzer system had been hiding in the valley, mobile, repositioned, impossible to predict. The missile was already in the air, tracking Patterson's aircraft with deadly precision. Patterson broke hard right, pulling into a turn that pushed 6 Gs. His aircraft clawed for altitude as chaff and flares scattered in its wake. Torres didn't hesitate. She rolled left, pulling her nose toward the missile launch point. The Panzer was visible now, a squat track vehicle sitting on a ridgeline 2 miles ahead. Her targeting system locked. Her thumb found the pickle button. Fox 3. The HARM missile leaped off its rail, its anti-radiation seeker homing on the Panzer's acquisition radar. 3 seconds later, the enemy vehicle disappeared in a ball of fire and shrapnel. But the damage was done. Phantom 7, Raven 2. They've got me. Hydraulics warning. I'm losing control authority. Torres snapped her head around, searching for Patterson's aircraft. She found it climbing away from a valley floor, trailing a thin stream of vapor from its left wing route. Raven 2, status report. Left hydraulic system failure. I've got partial control, but it's getting worse. Patterson's voice was tight with fear. I think a fragment caught me on the climb out. Torres's mind raced through the options. Patterson could try to nurse the aircraft back to Atlas, but damaged hydraulics had a way of cascading into complete failure. He could eject, but they were 60 miles inside hostile territory. He'd be captured or killed within hours. Or he could keep flying. Raven 2, listen to me very carefully. How much control do you have? Maybe 70%? The stick is fighting me, but I can maintain level flight. 70%. It wasn't enough for combat maneuvering. It wasn't enough of the precision flying required to complete this mission, but it might be enough to survive. Change of plan, Torres said, her voice steady as stone. You're going to continue to the rally point and orbit at 15,000 feet. Stay outside the threat rings. Provide tactical awareness and communications relay. But the mission, I'll complete the mission. Silence stretched over the radio. When Patterson spoke again, his voice was raw. You can't do this alone. The threat environment, the number of hostile systems. One aircraft can't. One aircraft is all we have. Torres checked her weapon status. 4 AMRAAMs, 1 remaining harm. 2 GBU-12s. 500 rounds. Get to the rally point, Patterson. If I go down, you're the only one left who can call for backup. Phantom 7, That's an order, Lieutenant. Another pause. Then quieter. Copy, Phantom 7. Raven 2 proceeding to rally point. Good hunting. Torres watched his aircraft peel away, climbing toward the relative safety of higher altitude. She was alone now. Just her and the aircraft and 60 miles of enemy-held territory between her and 8 Marines who were running out of time. She descended back into the valley, throttles advancing to military power. Time to go to work. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in terrain masking and evasive flying. Torres wove through the valley system like a needle, threading an impossibly complex maze. She used ridgelines for cover, timed her exposure to known radar sites with split-second precision, climbed and descended in patterns designed to confuse predictive tracking algorithms. 3 more times, enemy systems tried to acquire her. 3 more times, she disappeared into the terrain before they could launch. But the closer she got to the factory complex, the denser the defenses became. Phantom 7, this is Atlas Control. We're tracking multiple hostile aircraft launching from runway 27 at Echo Base. 4 contacts, probable MiG-29s, heading your direction. ETA to intercept, 8 minutes. Torres processed information without slowing. For MiGs, 8 minutes. That left her maybe 6 minutes to reach the target, conduct the strike, and begin her egress before the enemy fighters caught up with her. 6 minutes wasn't enough time. She pushed the throttles past military power into afterburner, the acceleration pressing her into the seat as the Super Hornet screamed through the valley at over 700 knots. The fuel gauge dropped perceptibly. The engine temperature climbed toward the red line. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the mission. The factory complex appeared on her radar display at 30 miles. A sprawl of bombed-out buildings surrounded by rubble and the remains of what had once been an industrial park. Thermal imaging showed hot spots throughout the area, vehicles, weapon systems, human bodies. And at the center of it all, 8 small heat signatures clustered in a defensive formation inside a collapsed warehouse. The Marines were still alive. Torres's finger moved to the radio transmit button. Stalker 6. Stalker 6. This is Phantom 7 inbound your position. Say status. The response came back broken, distorted by interference in the distance, but recognizable. Phantom 7? This is Stalker. Ammunition critical. 3 wounded. Enemy massing for final assault. Static swallowed the rest. Torres's jaw tightened. She was still 15 miles out. The MiGs were 6 minutes behind her, and the Marines sounded like they were minutes from being overrun. Stalker 6, hold position. Air support is inbound. Mark your location with IR strobe. I say again, mark with IR strobe. A tiny blinking light appeared on her targeting display, right in the center of the collapsed warehouse. The Marines had heard her. They knew help was coming. Now she just had to deliver. The valley opened up as she approached the target area, forcing her to climb slightly to clear a ridgeline. The moment her aircraft broke the radar horizon, her warning receiver erupted. Multiple systems were painting her now. An S-400 battery 12 miles to the north, a Panzer system on the factory's perimeter, and something else, something that took her a moment to identify. A ZSU-23-4, anti-aircraft artillery, old Soviet technology, but still lethal at close range. The enemy had positioned it directly between her and the Marines. Torres rolled left, then right, jinking to throw off tracking solutions as she analyzed the tactical picture. The S-400 was too far away for an immediate engagement. She'd have to worry about it on the way out. The Panzer was a primary threat, and the ZSU was going to make her attack run extremely uncomfortable. She selected her remaining HARM missile and designated the Panzer as the target. The seeker head locked on. The symbology went green. Fox 3. The missile streaked away, riding a beam of radar energy toward the enemy air defense vehicle. Torres didn't wait to see the impact. She was already rolling into her attack run. Nose down, airspeed climbing through 500 knots. The ZSU opened up when she crossed the perimeter. Streams of 23mm tracer fire arced into the sky, filling the air with glowing death. Torres threw the aircraft into a barrel roll, bleeding energy she couldn't afford to lose, but staying out of the kill zone. The HARM found its target. A fireball rose from the Panzer's position, secondary explosions cooking off as stored missiles detonated. One threat down. Too many to count remaining. Torres pulled out of her role and reacquired the factory complex. The enemy forces were visible now. Infantry and technical vehicles swarming toward the warehouse where Marines were dug in. She had seconds to make a decision. The GBU-12s were precision weapons, but they needed a guidance laser to find their targets. In a single-seat aircraft, that meant she had to maintain a relatively steady flight path while the bomb tracked to impact. Steady flight paths got pilots killed. Torres selected the first GBU-12 and designated a cluster of enemy vehicles massing near the warehouse's eastern entrance. The targeting pod locked. The symbologist stabilized. Stalker 6, danger close. Danger close. Get your heads down. She pickled the weapon and held the designation, fighting the urge to break away as the ZSU continued to pour fire into the sky around her. The laser-guided bomb fell away from her wing, its fins adjusting, its seeker tracking the dancing dot light painted on the target. Impact. The explosion was massive, bigger than she'd expected. Secondary detonations ripped through the clustered vehicles as stored ammunition and fuel ignited in a cascading inferno. The ZSU's fire slackened momentarily as the crew was thrown by the shockwave. Torres used the opportunity to roll away and set up for her second run. Phantom 7, Stalker 6. Good hit. Good hit. Enemy falling back from east side. Copy, Stalker 6. One more coming. She came around again, this time from the northwest, using the smoke and chaos of the first strike for concealment. The second GBU-12 was targeted at a larger concentration of enemy troops advancing from the opposite direction. But the ZSU had found her again. Tracers walked across her flight path, and Torres felt impact shudder through the airframe before she could break away. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel. The aircraft bucked and yawed as something vital was damaged. She pickled the bomb anyway. The GBU-12 tracked true, slamming into the center of the enemy formation and turning it into a crater of fire and smoke. The attack on the Marines from the west was broken, but so was her aircraft. Phantom 7, Atlas Control, were tracking multiple new contacts. Looks like the MiGs have accelerated. They're coming in hot. Torres checked her radar. 4 contacts, now less than 40 miles out and closing at over 1,000 knots. She had maybe 3 minutes before they were in missile range. 3 minutes wasn't enough time to finish the mission. She keyed the radio. Stalker 6 status? The response came back clearer now, the interference fading as she orbited closer to the Marine's position. Phantom 7, this is Stalker 6 actual. That's Staff Sergeant Derek Mitchell. Ma'am, Mitchell. Ma'am, you just saved our asses, but we're not clear yet. I've got 20 plus hostiles still in the compound. My boys are hurt. We can't fight our way out on foot. Mitchell's voice was steady, but Torres could hear the exhaustion beneath it. 19 hours of continuous combat, ammunition critical, 3 wounded. And now, even with the main assault broken, they were still surrounded. Stalker 6, what do you need? I need a miracle, ma'am. We need close air support for at least 10 more minutes while we move to the extraction point. Can you give us that? Torres looked at her instruments. Hydraulic pressure dropping, fuel state critical, multiple weapon systems showing degraded performance, and 4 enemy fighters closing at Mach 1. 10 minutes. She thought about Sarah Mitchell, about the promise she'd made to Sarah's mother. About the 19-year-old kid who'd enlisted the day after his sister's funeral because he wanted to serve the way she'd served. Stalker 6, she said quietly. You've got your miracle. Torres punched the throttles into afterburner and climbed to meet the incoming MiGs. The radar picture crystallized as she gained altitude. 4 contacts, line abreast, still 40 miles out, but closing fast. They would have her on their radar by now. They would be preparing their missiles, calculating their intercept geometry. What they wouldn't be expecting was for a lone aircraft to turn and fight. Torres selected her first AMRAAM and designated the lead MiG. The symbology went green. Her thumb found the trigger. Fox 3. The missile dropped away and accelerated toward Mach 4, its active radar seeker searching for the designated target. She didn't wait for the result. She was already selecting her second missile, designating the next fighter in the formation. Fox 3. 2 missiles outbound. 2 targets. The MiGs were reacting now, breaking formation, deploying countermeasures. Their radar warning receivers would be screaming. Their pilots would be executing evasive maneuvers. It bought her time. Atlas Control, Phantom 7. Engage 4 bandits. Continuing close air support. Phantom 7, Atlas. You cannot engage for MiGs alone. You need to disengage and... Torres turned off her radio. She rolled inverted and pulled toward the ground, diving back toward the factory complex with the throttle firewalled. The MiGs were breaking through her missile engagement, their countermeasures proving effective against the AMRAAM seekers. 3 contacts still showed on her display. Maybe 4. It was hard to tell with all the jamming. But she'd bought 6 minutes. 6 minutes for the Marines to move. Stalker 6, Phantom 7 back on station. I've got hostiles in the compound. Call targets. Mitchell's voice came back sharp and urgent. Phantom 7, we've got movement in the north building. Technical vehicles massing. They're gonna make a push. Torres found the building on her targeting display. She was too close for a bomb run, and she'd expended all her precision weapons anyway. That left the gun. 500 rounds. She needed to make every one count. The Super Hornet screamed across the factory complex at 200 feet, its cannon blazing. 20-millimeter rounds tore into the enemy vehicles, shredding metal and flesh with equal efficiency. Torres walked the fire across the entire formation, holding the trigger until the ammunition counter showed 300 rounds remaining. The enemy push collapsed before it began. Stalker 6, you're clear to move. Go now. Roger, Phantom 7. We're moving. Torres pulled up and scanned for the next threat. Her radar warning receiver was screaming constantly now. The MiGs were close, too close, and her aircraft was hemorrhaging systems. The right engine was running rough. Fuel was streaming from somewhere she couldn't see, and the flight controls felt sluggish in a way that suggested hydraulic failure was imminent. But the Marines were moving. Through her targeting pod, she could see 8 figures emerging from the collapsed warehouse, carrying wounded between them. They were running toward the extraction point, a clear area 500 meters to the south where a helicopter could land. 500 meters. Maybe 3 minutes of running. If nothing else went wrong. Something else went wrong. Missile launch. Missile launch. The warning came from her own systems this time. One of the MiGs had gotten close enough for a heat seeker shot. Torres saw the missile on her display, an R-73, supersonic and highly maneuverable, tracking toward her from her 7 o'clock. She had less than 4 seconds. Torres broke hard left, pulling into a descending spiral that pushed the aircraft past 8 Gs. Her vision narrowed as blood drained from her brain. The G-suit inflated, squeezing her legs and abdomen. Flares scattered from the aircraft dispensers, each one a burning beacon designed to draw the missile away. The R-73 wasn't fooled. It corrected, tracking through her countermeasures, adjusting its flight path to maintain intercept. Torres saw it coming in her peripheral vision. A tiny dart of fire growing larger with impossible speed. She had maybe a second left. She made a decision that defied every instinct in her body. Instead of continuing to evade, she rolled wings level and yanked the nose up, presenting the missile with a direct tail shot. At the last possible moment, the last tenth of a second, she chopped the throttles to idle and deployed the speed brakes. The Super Hornet decelerated so violently that Torres was thrown forward against her harness. The missile, calibrated for a maneuvering target, Overshot. It passed less than 20 feet from her left wing, its seeker unable to correct in time. The explosion came a quarter second later, close enough to pepper her aircraft with shrapnel, but far enough to avoid catastrophic damage. Torres shoved the throttles forward again, feeling the remaining engine struggle to respond. Something was definitely wrong with the power plant now. The temperature gauges were pegged in the red. Warning lights covered her instrument panel like Christmas decorations. But she was still flying. Stalker 6, status on that movement? Mitchell's voice came back strained. He was running. She could hear it. 300 meters to extraction point. We're almost there. Copy. Keep moving. Torres looked for the MiGs. 2 were visible on radar, circling at the edge of the threat envelope, clearly reassessing after their missile failed. The other 2 were unaccounted for, either shot down by her earlier AMRAAMs or repositioning for another attack. She had maybe 90 seconds before they came at her again. Stalker 6, Phantom 7. I'm going to make one more pass to clear the extraction zone. When I call touchdown, you pop smoke and get ready for pickup. Roger, Phantom 7. Standing by for touchdown. Torres selected her cannon and dropped toward the extraction zone. Enemy infantry was visible throughout the compound, some still advancing toward the Marines' route of egress. She had 300 rounds left. She would use all of them. The Super Hornet's cannon roared as she swept across the compound, 20mm rounds chewing through walls and vehicles and exposed fighters. Torres held the trigger down, walking fire across every enemy position she could identify. The counter dropped, 200, 150, 100, and still she kept shooting. 50 rounds. 20, 0. The cannon went silent. Torres was out of ammunition, but the extraction zone was clear. Touchdown! Touchdown! Pop smoke. Purple smoke billowed from the extraction point as Torres climbed away from the compound. Through her targeting pod, she watched the Marines reach the clear area, forming a defensive perimeter around their wounded. They were out. They were ready for pickup. Now she just had to survive long enough for the helicopter to arrive. Atlas Control, Phantom 7. Extraction zone is secure. Stalker team ready for pickup. The response came back immediately. Phantom 7, rescue helo is inbound. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Torres checked her fuel state. She had maybe 8 minutes of flight time remaining. Her engine was failing. Her hydraulics were compromised. And 2 MiGs were still out there, looking for another shot. 6 minutes might as well be 6 hours. The first MiG found her at 3 minutes. It came in from her 10 o'clock, nose on, already in guns range. The pilot was good. He'd used the terrain to mask his approach, and now he had her dead to rights. Torres saw the muzzle flash before she heard the impacts. 30mm cannon rounds tore through her left wing, shredding metal and control surfaces. The aircraft rolled violently as the damage disrupted her aerodynamics. Warning alarm screamed. Fire warning lights illuminated. Torres fought the controls, using every ounce of strength to bring the aircraft back to level flight. The stick felt like it was moving through concrete. The right engine coughed, sputtered, and died completely. Single engine. On fire. No weapons. No hydraulics. And a MiG coming around for another pass. This was how it ended. Torres thought about Sarah Mitchell, about the promise she'd made, about all the pilots she'd saved over the years, and all the ones she'd lost. She thought about Derek Mitchell, standing in the purple smoke, waiting for a helicopter that was still 3 minutes away. And she made a decision. Torres shoved the throttle forward on her remaining engine and pointed her crippled aircraft directly at the MiG. The enemy pilot saw her coming. He broke left, tried to evade, but Torres anticipated the move. She rolled to follow, pulling G's that the damaged aircraft shouldn't have been able to handle. Metal screamed. Something in the wing structure let go, but the nose tracked true. The MiG's pilot realized what was happening too late. He tried to reverse his turn, but Torres was already there, her burning aircraft closing to point-blank range. She wasn't trying to ram him. She didn't need to. At 600 feet of separation, Torres did something that no pilot should ever do. She pulled back on the stick with all her strength, crossing directly in front of the MiG and creating a wall of jet wash and debris that no aircraft could fly through. The enemy pilot tried to pull away. He almost made it. Almost. The MiG's nose pitched down as it hit her wake turbulence, and at that altitude, at that speed, there was no recovery time. The fighter slammed into the desert floor, cartwheeling across the sand in a ball of fire and metal. Torres's aircraft wasn't much better off. The violent maneuver had finished what the cannon fire had started. Her remaining engine was making sound that engines should never make. The fire warning lights had been joined by half a dozen other calamities, and her flight controls were responding intermittently at best. But she was still flying. Atlas Control, Phantom 7, one bandit down, one remaining. Phantom 7, Atlas. Rescue helicopter is 30 seconds out. Can you maintain station? Torres looked at her instruments. Everything was dying. She had maybe 2 minutes of flight time before the aircraft quit entirely. Negative, Atlas. I'm coming down one way or another. Tell that Hello to move fast. Copy, Phantom 7. Hello is... The second MiG announced itself with another missile launch. This time, Torres had nothing left. No countermeasures. No energy for evasive maneuvering. No weapons to fight back with. She watched the missile track toward her on the display, a small icon representing her death getting closer with every heartbeat. And then something impossible happened. Lieutenant Jake Patterson's voice cut across the radio, clear and strong. Fox 3. An AMRAAM screamed in from nowhere, its seeker locked onto the approaching R-73. The missiles crossed paths less than a mile from Torres's aircraft, the AMRAAM's proximity fused detonating and destroying the Russian missile in mid-flight. Phantom 7, Raven 2. I've got the last bandit. Torres's head snapped around, and she saw Patterson's aircraft diving out of the sun, another missile already in the air. The second MiG tried to break away, but Patterson's shot was true. The AMRAAM caught the enemy fighter squarely in the tail section, and it came apart in a spectacular fireball. Splash 2. Raven 2 has splashed 2. Torres was laughing and crying at the same time, her voice cracking as she keyed the radio. Patterson, your orders were to stay at the rally point. With all due respect, ma'am, you also told me that combat flying was different from training. I decided this was a good time to learn. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, ma'am. Court-martial me later. Right now, let's get you home. Torres looked at her instruments. Fire warnings on both sides now. Hydraulic pressure at 0. Single engine failing. She had maybe 60 seconds of flight time remaining. Patterson, I'm not going to make it back to Atlas. Ma'am, aircraft's too damaged. I've got enough fuel for maybe one landing attempt, and it's going to be somewhere close. Torres scanned the terrain below, looking for anything that resembled a runway. There's a road about 4 miles south. Looks straight enough. That's not a runway, ma'am. That's a highway. It's 4,000 feet of paved surface. It'll have to do. Torres banked toward the road, her failing engine screaming in protest. The fire warnings were constant now. Smoke was filling the cockpit, despite the ventilation system. Her eyes were watering, making it hard to see, but she could see the road. Straight, flat, deserted. Stalker 6, Phantom 7. What's your status? Mitchell's voice came back, but it sounded different now, emotional in a way that surprised her. Phantom 7 were aboard the Hello. All 8 Marines extracted. All 8. He paused. Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. Torres lined up on the road, her altitude dropping to 500 feet. Get home safe, Stalker 6. That's all the thanks I need. Copy, ma'am. And Phantom 7? My sister used to talk about you. She said you were the best pilot she'd ever known. She was right. Torres's throat tightened, but she didn't have time to respond. The road was coming up fast, and her engine chose that moment to die completely. Total power loss. The Super Hornet was now a 40,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic properties of a brick. Torres reacted on instinct, pitching for best glide speed, 190 knots. She lowered the landing gear manually, using the emergency system. 3 green lights. Small miracle. The road was 1,000 feet ahead. 800. 600. She was coming in too fast. Without engine power, she couldn't adjust her glide path. She was going to land long, maybe too long, and 4,000 feet of highway suddenly seemed very short. For 100 feet, Torres reached up and pulled the handle to jettison her external fuel tanks. The pylons released, and the empty tanks tumbled away. The sudden reduction in weight and drag bought her a few precious seconds. 200 feet. She was over the threshold now, the road stretching ahead like a gray ribbon through the sand. Her airspeed was decaying, but not fast enough. She needed to bleed energy, but she had nothing left to bleed with. 100 feet. Torres made a decision that would have gotten her failed out of flight school. She extended the speed brakes and simultaneously raised the nose, using the aircraft's belly as an air brake. The Super Hornet shuddered violently, fighting conflicting commands, but it worked. Her airspeed dropped. 180, 170, 160. The main gear kissed the pavement at 155 knots. The aircraft slammed down hard, bouncing once before settling onto all three wheels. The nose gear shrieked as it fought to stay aligned with the runway's centerline. Smoke poured from the tires. The smell of burning rubber filled the cockpit. Torres stood on the brakes, feeling the anti-skid system cycling frantically. The highway stretched ahead, but it was ending. She could see the point where the pavement gave way to sand, getting closer with every second. 2,000 feet remaining. 1,000. The aircraft was slowing, but not fast enough. Torres was going to run out of road. She did the only thing left to do. She aimed for the softest-looking patch of sand and prayed. The Super Hornet left the pavement at 60 knots, plowing into the desert. Sand exploded around the aircraft as it decelerated violently, the nose gear collapsing under the strain. The fighter slid forward on its belly, metal screaming against rock and dirt, until finally, it came to rest. Torres sat in the cockpit for a long moment, breathing hard, heart pounding. The aircraft was on fire in at least 3 places. The cockpit was filling with smoke. Every warning system was screaming at her to get out, but she was alive. She reached up and pulled the canopy jettison handle. The heavy glass flew away, and fresh air rushed in to replace the smoke. Torres disconnected her harness with shaking hands and climbed out onto the wing. The desert stretched around her in every direction, empty and silent except for crackle of burning fuel. She slid down from the wing and walked 30 feet from the wreckage before her legs gave out. She sat in the sand, looking at what remained of her aircraft, and let the tears come. 3 MiG-29s destroyed. 1 Panzer system. Over 100 enemy fighters killed in strafing runs. 8 Marines saved. All 8 Marines saved. The helicopter found her 20 minutes later, following the smoke plume that rose from her crashed aircraft. Patterson's Super Hornet circled overhead, maintaining a protective watch until the rescue crew could reach her. Torres looked up as the helicopter landed, and for a moment, she saw Sarah Mitchell's face in the swirling sand. Sarah was smiling. Sarah was proud. Then the medics were there, asking questions, checking her for injuries. Torres let them work, answering their queries in a voice that didn't quite sound like her own. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital. You've got second-degree burns on your hands and possible smoke inhalation." Torres nodded, but she wasn't really listening. She was thinking about promises, about the ones she'd kept and the ones she'd failed to keep. She'd saved Derek Mitchell, Sarah's brother, the kid who'd enlisted the day after his sister's funeral because he wanted to serve the way she'd served. Maybe now, finally, Sarah's death meant something. Or maybe it had always meant something, and Torres was just too lost in guilt to see it. The hospital at Forward Operating Base Atlas was a series of connected tents with surprisingly advanced medical equipment inside. Torres lay on a treatment bed while doctors examined her burns and checked her vital signs. She'd inhaled more smoke than she realized. Her oxygen saturation was low, and they'd put her on supplemental air. But she was going to be fine, physically at least. The curtain to her treatment area rustled, and Colonel Reeves stepped through. His expression was unreadable as he looked at her. "Captain Torres, how are you feeling?" "Like I just crashed a $30 million aircraft into the Syrian desert, sir." The ghost of a smile crossed Reeves's face. "Fair enough." He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Torres closed her eyes. "Disobeyed orders. Violated tactical protocols. Got my aircraft destroyed. I'm sure there's a court-martial in there somewhere. That's one way to look at it." Reeves was silent for a moment. "Here's another way. In a 41-minute engagement, you destroyed 3 enemy fighters, 2 air defense systems, and approximately 120 hostile combatants. You provided close air support that enabled the extraction of 8 Marines from an impossible tactical situation. You achieved air superiority over a sector that 6 hours ago was considered completely denied. Torres opened her eyes. And I lost the aircraft. You brought it down in one piece. Relatively speaking. Reeves shook his head slowly. The maintenance crews are saying they've never seen an aircraft with that much damage still able to fly. They counted over 200 holes in the fuselage. Both engines showed evidence of fire damage. Your hydraulic system was completely shot. By every technical standard, that aircraft should have fallen out of the sky somewhere over the factory complex. So why didn't it? Reeves looked at her for a long moment. Because you refused to let it. Torres said nothing. She stared at the ceiling of the medical tent, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. There's someone who wants to see you, Reeves said, standing up. If you're up for it. Torres turned her head. Who? In answer, Reeves pulled back the curtain. Standing on the other side was a young Marine in desert camouflage, his arm in a sling, his face covered in dust and dry blood. Staff Sergeant Derek Mitchell. Torres pushed herself up on her elbows as Mitchell approached. He looked older than 26. Combat did that to people, but his eyes were familiar. She'd seen those same eyes looking at her from flight school photos for 5 years. Sarah's eyes. Ma'am. Mitchell's voice was rough with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Staff Sergeant. But I do. Mitchell stepped closer, and Torres could see that his eyes were wet. When we were in that warehouse, surrounded, out of ammo, I made peace with the fact that I was going to die. I thought about my parents, my sister. I thought about how they'd get another folded flag, another visit from someone in dress uniform. Torres's chest tightened. And then you showed up. Mitchell's voice cracked. One aircraft, no support. Against everything they threw at you, you showed up and you saved all of us. I had help. Lieutenant Patterson. Patterson told me what happened. You sent him away because his aircraft was damaged. You did the whole mission solo. Mitchell shook his head. You did the same thing Sarah used to tell me about. The thing you did in the Zagros Mountains. You flew through the impossible because you refused to let anyone else die. Torres couldn't speak. The lump in her throat was too big. Sarah used to write me letters, Mitchell continued. When I was in boot camp, when I was in recon training, whenever I was struggling, she'd tell me stories about you. About how you were the best pilot she'd ever seen. About how she wanted to be like you someday. He wiped his eyes with his good hand. She was wrong, though. Wrong about what? She didn't need to be like you. She already was. Mitchell reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a challenge coin, worn smooth from years of handling. She gave me this before she deployed. Said it would keep me safe. Said it was from her best friend in the squadron. He pressed the coin into Torres's hand. She looked down at it. On one side was the emblem of VFA 83. On the other, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, fly safe, fly home, always. Torres remembered giving that coin to Sarah 6 years ago. She'd had it made specifically for her, a gift for completing their first deployment together. She wanted me to give it back to you, Mitchell said quietly. If I ever got the chance. She said you'd need it someday. When the guilt got too heavy to carry alone, Torres closed her fingers around the coin, feeling its weight, its history. I never stopped thinking about her, she whispered. Every mission, every flight, she's there with me. Every time I strap into that cockpit, I hear her voice on the radio. She'd be proud of you, ma'am. She'd be so goddamn proud. Torres looked up at Mitchell, and for the first time in 5 years, she let someone see the real her, not the legend, not the ghost story. Just Maya Torres, a pilot carrying more weight than any one person should have carry. I made a promise to your mother at Sarah's funeral. I told her I'd spend the rest of my life making sure Sarah's death meant something. I know, she told me, but I don't know if I've kept that promise. I don't know if anything I've done has been enough. Mitchell reached out and put his good hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, you just saved 8 lives. 8 Marines who get to go home to their families. 8 people who will live to see another sunrise because you refuse to give up. He squeezed gently. If that's not meaning, then I don't know what is. Torres held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Thank you. Staff Sergeant. Thank you, Captain, for everything. Mitchell stepped back and rendered a crisp salute with his uninjured arm. Torres returned it as best she could from her hospital bed. Then he was gone, and she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of a challenge coin that felt heavier than it should. Colonel Reeves returned a few minutes later, accompanied by a figure in digital camouflage that Torres didn't recognize. Captain Torres, Reeves said, this is Lieutenant General Harrison, Commander, Joint Special Operations Command. Torres tried to sit up straighter, but the general waved her down. At ease, Captain. You've earned the right to stay horizontal. Harrison was an older man, gray-haired and weathered, with eyes that had seen every kind of war the modern world had to offer. I wanted to deliver this news personally. News, sir? Harrison pulled a chair next to her bed and sat down. As of 0600 this morning, you've been approved for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations against an armed enemy. Torres blinked. Sir, I don't. The citation will read, in part, that Captain Maya Torres, despite operating alone against overwhelming enemy forces, displayed exceptional courage, tactical skill, and selfless devotion to duty that resulted in the successful rescue of 8 United States Marines from certain death. Harrison paused. It's the second highest decoration the Navy can award. Torres didn't know what to say. She'd never cared about medals. They were just metal and ribbon, physical symbols of moments that lived in memory regardless of what hung on your chest. But this one meant something different. There's more, Harrison continued. Lieutenant Patterson is being recommended for the Silver Star. His decision to disobey your orders and return to the fight directly saved your life and ensured the mission's success. Torres almost smiled. He's going to be impossible to live with, probably, but he's earned the right. Harrison stood up. Captain, what you did out there was the kind of thing that gets written about in military history books. Not because of the kills or the successful extraction, but because of what it represents. One pilot, alone, against everything the enemy could throw at her, and winning. I didn't win, sir. I survived. In war, Captain. That's often the same thing. Harrison moved toward the exit, then paused. Get some rest. You've got a long recovery ahead, and the Navy's going to want you back in a cockpit as soon as you're able. He left, and Torres lay back against her pillow, staring at the canvas ceiling above her. The Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor. Sarah Mitchell had been posthumously awarded the same medal after the Zagros Mountains engagement. Her parents had received it at a ceremony in Arlington, with full honors and a flag folded 13 times. Now Torres will wear the same ribbon. She and Sarah, connected by more than just friendship, connected by sacrifice. The next few days passed in a blur of medical evaluations, intelligence debriefings, and well-wishers who came to shake her hand and thank her for what she'd done. Torres bore it all with patient resignation, waiting for a moment when she could escape the hospital and return to the relative solitude of her quarters. Patterson visited twice, the second time to show her the Silver Star that had arrived by courier from Washington. He was proud, as he should be, but there was something different in his eyes now, something harder. Combat did that to people. They're sending me back to Oceana for advanced tactical training, Patterson said. 6 months of schooling, then reassignment to a combat squadron. Good. You'll do well. Patterson hesitated. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Ask. How do you keep doing it? After everything you've been through, all the pilots you've lost, how do you keep climbing into the cockpit? Torres was quiet for a long moment. It was a question she'd asked herself every day for 5 years. The question that had no good answer. Because the alternative is worse, she finally said. If I stop flying, if I walk away, then everyone I've ever lost died for nothing. The only way their sacrifice means anything is if I keep going, keep flying, keep saving the people I can save, even when it costs you everything. Torres looked at him directly, especially then. Patterson nodded slowly, processing her words. I think I understand. At least, I think I'm starting to. That's enough for now. Understanding comes with time. And missions. Yes, ma'am. Patterson stood and extended his hand. Torres shook it. Fly safe, Captain. You too, Lieutenant. You too. The morning of Torres's discharge from the hospital, Colonel Reeves arrived with a car to take her back to the flight line. She walked out of the medical tent under her own power, her hands still bandaged but healing, her lungs clear of the smoke that had filled them during the crash. The Syrian sun was climbing over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. "Aircraft's waiting for you," Reeves said as they drove. "See, 1:30 back to Oceana. Medical staff will accompany you for flight." Torres nodded, watching the landscape roll past. "What about my Super Hornet?" "Total loss. They tried to recover it, but there wasn't enough left to save. It's being stripped for parts and then scrapped." She felt a pang of loss at that. She'd flown that aircraft for 2 years. It had been an extension of herself, a partner in every mission, every engagement, and now it was gone. "We'll assign you a new one when you're cleared for flight status," Reeves continued. "Probably 3 to 4 months, given your injuries. I'll be ready in 2. Reeves glanced at her. "Captain, you suffered second-degree burns, smoke inhalation, and the kind of physical trauma that would put most pilots in a desk job permanently. Take the time you need. With respect, sir, I know my limits. I'll be ready." Reeves was silent for a moment, then quietly, "You really don't know how to stop, do you?" "No, sir, I don't." The flight line came into view, the C-130 sitting on the tarmac, with its engines already running. Torres could see a small group of people gathered near the aircraft, maintenance crews, operations staff, a few pilots she recognized. As the car approached, something strange happened. The people began to form up in 2 parallel lines, creating an honor corridor from the car to the aircraft ramp. Reeves stopped the car at the edge of the formation and turned to Torres. "They wanted to say goodbye. All of them. When word spread that you were leaving, every off-duty member of this base volunteered to see you off." Torres stared at the assembled crowd. There had to be over 200 people standing at attention in the early morning light. I don't deserve this." "That's where you're wrong, Captain." Reeves opened his door and stepped out. "That's exactly where you're wrong." Torres climbed out of the car on unsteady legs. The desert wind was cool on her face, carrying sand and the smell of jet fuel. She walked toward the corridor of service members, and as she approached, they rendered salutes. 200 hands rising in perfect synchronization, honoring her the way warriors have honored their own since the beginning of warfare. Torres walked between them, returning salutes, looking into face after face. She saw respect, admiration, gratitude, and something else. She saw hope. Hope that one person could make a difference. Hope that courage and sacrifice still meant something in a world that often seemed to have forgotten both. She reached the base of the C-130's ramp, and Colonel Reeves was there waiting for her. "Captain Torres," he said formally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It has been an honor to serve with you. Whatever happens next, wherever you go, know that you have earned the eternal respect of everyone here. Fly safe." Torres saluted him. "Fly safe, Colonel." She turned and walked up the ramp, disappearing into the aircraft's cargo bay. The loadmaster secured the ramp behind her, and the C-130's engines increased to full power. Through the small window, Torres watched the base grow smaller as the aircraft climbed. She watched the desert spread out beneath her, the same terrain she'd nearly died over just days ago. And she thought about Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, who had died protecting her country. Sarah, whose brother had just been saved by the same pilot who couldn't save her. Sarah, whose memory lived on in every mission Torres flew, every risk she took, every life she saved. "I kept my promise," Torres whispered to the empty cargo bay. "I kept it, Sarah. Your death meant something. It meant 8 Marines going home to their families. It meant a brother who gets to live because his sister taught me how to be brave." The coin in her pocket pressed against her thigh, warm from her body heat. "Fly safe. Fly home. Always." Torres closed her eyes and let the aircraft carry her eastward, toward home, toward whatever came next. But she knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end. It was never the end for people like her. There would be another mission, another impossible situation, another group of lives hanging in the balance. And when that moment came, she would climb into the cockpit and do what she'd always done. She would fly, she would fight, and she would bring everyone home. Because that was the promise. That was the burden. That was a terrible beautiful gift of being the pilot who refused to die when death was the only logical outcome. Maya Torres, called Sign Phantom 7, was going home. But somewhere out there, someone was already planning the next mission, the next crisis, the next moment when the impossible would become necessary. And when that call came, she would answer. She would always answer. Captain Maya Torres' story shows us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite the certainty of sacrifice. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have turned back when your wingman was hit, or would you have continued alone? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one. The sunrise painted the cloud in shades of fire as the sea. 130 climbed through 30,000 feet, carrying a legend home. Phantom 7 was still flying. And somewhere in the vastness above, Sarah Mitchell